Welcome back to Masters of Modern. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with my wonderful co-host, Michael Grothy.
Hello.
How are you? How have you been? It's been a little bit of a minute since we last saw you on this weekly podcast called the MMcast, no longer called the Masters of Modern. Got to get used to that. So for those who don't know, we've changed our name to the MMcast, so that now we can talk about anything we want to talk about instead of just Modern. We will still talk about Modern. Modern's still not focus of this podcast, especially because contextually that is where we understand Magic the most from. But especially during COVID, we've been playing so many other different formats. We've been playing Commander every Monday. So we are now the MMcast as kind of just an abbreviated version. Who knows what that means? Masters of Magic, Monday Magic, Maximum
Michael Marshall Cast,
Maximum Michael Marshall Madness. That's the MMM cast. Cast. And so today we're talking about Landfall, actually. So for those who don't know, we are returning to Zendikar for the third time. My real first set as a Magic player was original Zendikar. Landfall made it showing there, and it is returning. It is probably the most inherently tied to Zendikar mechanic out there. When people think of Zendikar, they think of Landfall, similar to how other sets have similar mechanics. That I'm not, for some reason, blanking on a good example. Split cards and gold cards in Ravnica. And so we are going to go through each of the cards from the new set, kind of talk about them, see how good they are. Also, a little bit of a conversation on just the different times Landfall has shown up, a little bit on how, where the design philosophy this time came from versus last time. So when they returned to battle for Zendikar, there was definitely a pulling back on power level for Landfall and causing it kind of to thud as a return to a mechanic, among other things from that block. But this time they're like, you know what? Landfall is a big deal. Can we make it more powerful? I think the fact that they don't have fetch lands actually help them make them a little bit more powerful than they would have. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about Landfall today. Michael, what are your thoughts on the return of Landfall?
Yes, so a lot of these cards look more like the Zendikar ones, like you were saying, whereas like the BFZ, everything, all the Landfall cards kind of like cost one more mana or got, +1/+1 instead of +2/+2 for all of their like original Zendikar counterparts. And I think that you are right, that the reason for that is that fetch lands were in standard at the time that they printed BFZ. And I think they looked back to original Zendikar, which had fetch lands, obviously the origin of the enemy fetch lands. They were like, that format was too aggressive. We want to dial it back for whatever reason, pendulum swinging standard, etc. So they decided to make them all weaker. This time around, it looks like we are closer to the power level. We have like analogs like Ruin Crab, Tehedron Crab, which I know it doesn't, mill you, so it's obviously worse. But we have like a color shifted step links, just word for word. We have Lotus Cobra's back. We have like a card that looks a lot like Plated Geopede. We have a lot of creatures that get a +1/+1 counter instead of just a temporary buff. So it seems like it's like pushed a lot more. And I think the reason for that is, like you said, there's no fetch lands in standard, so they don't have to worry about the power level of these cards in standard as much. Because if you're getting multiple land drops, you're like working for it with like one of your 4 Fabled Passages, or you're like playing, a ramp spell or something.
Yeah, and I mean, like when we returned the battle for Zendikar, it wasn't a total bust for Landfall. Probably the two most infamous Landfall cards from that set were Omnath, Locus of Rage, which is like maybe arguably one of the best red-green commanders ever printed. And then Retreat to Coral Helm, which is modern staple in the Retreat, Night of the Reliquary kind of Landfall combo decks. And has
I've seen other retreats like randomly show up in either in combo decks or like commander decks where you're just hitting every land drop, like the Retreat to Hagra that drains when a land enters the battlefield. You can use that to like combo or to just gain some life or whatever.
And I've seen Retreat to Emerius play in commander just because it makes it's like a Landfall get a 1/1 token or pump your whole team. So it's like it's powerful. It's pretty specific.
Yeah, and there's nothing that exciting.
Right.
Amiria Shepherd also sees commander play. It was from Battle for Zendikar.
Yes, yeah. And that's just reanimate a thing. If it's a plains, you can get a non-land permanent versus a creature.
It goes non-land permanent from graveyard to hand. It's a plains, you return it to the battlefield.
Right.
That's like a commander card in like green-white decks where you can like get to 7 mana and then hit a bunch more land drops and like reanimate your whole graveyard and do some shenanigans.
Yeah, it's cool to feel excited about these landfall cards again versus last time where I was kind of just like, oh, none of these cards are that exciting. Even if some, like, I do think it's a little bit in the middle, right? Like Bloodghast 2, which we will be talking about, is different than in power level than original Bloodghast, but it is likely worse. And
I think that, like, you know, it's been proven time and time again that you have to be careful with cards that can come back from your graveyard without spending mana. Like, pretty much every time we've seen one of those, it's been at least mildly problematic, especially because, like, the more you print, the more there's like a critical mass that these decks can like go off consistently and have slight upgrades. And, you know, decks like Dredge in various formats, I don't think is something they're looking to print a ton of cards into all the time.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, even this last year, Cat Oven is an example, right? That was a card that was really powerful and, like, on paper shouldn't be, but, or like, it should be just fine, but like was like, in some ways format defining to the extent that they had to ban it. And then if you look at,
it's also like I think Cat Oven feels like it's a similar like Sensei's Divining Top ban where like
sure,
it just sucks to play with and against in addition to being like slightly too powerful.
No, I don't disagree with that. But then, like, you know, obviously Arclight Phoenix was really good. Vengevine has like had multiple times in modern history where it was a top tier deck. Now that was
Narcomoeba has generally been problematic whenever it's around a large card pool, and Prized Amalgam was like a big upgrade for a lot of those decks. Icarid in Legacy.
Right. And so now we're going to talk about the new landfall cards. And this is kind of this is a little bit what we're doing differently now is for our set review. This is basically part 2, where last week we talked about all the lands and flip lands that come into play. One small thing we realized post fact, thanks to comments, is that the like do 1 damage to target creature instant, and if it dies, exile it card is even better than we thought due to its interaction with Oko. Not Oko. Uro, thank you. I got there. So
Let's
you can
go through the ban list. Who's on the ban list? Wait, not Uro yet.
Not Uro yet. Hopefully this card fights it well enough. And basically you can target Uro before its triggers go off, exiling it. You're still like 1 for 1ing. They're like 3 for 1ing you, or 2 for 1ing you, but it does get rid of the second half of Uro, which is cool. And does make that card even more playable than it normally would, because that's such a powerful corner case that it'll be just available all the time. Before we get started, I do want to do a big shout out to our patrons, specifically the Nobles of House Modern, as well as everyone else. You get kind of a cool intro preview to the episode and everything else. And if you are a patron, you get access to the raw feed. We did a bunch of cool questions with at the beginning of this episode that only is exclusive to there. Some like wacky questions like which Ikoria animal would you most likely to eat on a sandwich, that are kind of based on. So last week I did a thing with Gavin. I'll talk about that in a second. But big pinkies up to all of our patrons, and especially the Nobles of House Modern. Thank you very much. And second shout out. Yes. So on Wednesday last week, I was on Good Morning Magic, which is Gavin Verhey's new morning magic show every day. It's on YouTube. There's going to be a link below. We did a whole thing. We played a bunch of games. We're asking a bunch of wacky questions. Definitely go check that out. It was a blast to film. And yeah, you should watch it. It was cool. And if you came from that and you're watching this for the first time after watching that, thank you for stopping by. All right. First landfall card, and this is a card that makes me sad, but for different reasons. Canyon Jerboa, 2 and a white, 1/2, landfall, mouse. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Power level wise, we can talk about it in a second. The sadness is that this is the animal that basically lures Simba to his Mufasa's death at the beginning, in the middle of Lion King. It's like in a cavern. You can kind of see the dust of a stampede in the distance behind it.
Or the flavor text is "Move, you wretched thing! You're scaring the herdas."
So Mufasa dies immediately after this card enters play. As far as power level concerns, I think it's cool that it's giving, that landfall bonus to all creatures. We didn't really see that. I like Mouse returning as a creature type. We've talked about the white rodent. Eventually we'll get the blue rodent beavers. Is what I think we decided.
Forbidden blue rodent.
And yeah, I think it's like that's most of what I have to say about it.
I will say that I think this set explored new directions for landfall much better than the previous set. Like original Zendikar was mostly play a land, get something small like a until end of turn buff or 1 damage target player, or this creature gets flying or whatever until end of turn. But they didn't experiment with a lot of permanent resources or like, whole team buffs or whatever. In this set, Zendikar Reborn is what it's called.
Rising.
Sorry. Zendikar Rising does a lot of like permanent buffs, or this one, which is like a team buff. So that's cool. I think this is whatever. I mean, if there's like a green-white landfall deck in standard, maybe it'll be playable. It doesn't really excite me outside of that.
Fearless Fledgling, which I believe has the most starkly different artwork between actual card printed and promo card. Like the promo card, I believe, is like a majestic looking bird, and then the actual card Griffin is wild. You can see it right there.
Yeah.
1 and a white, 1/1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Fearless Fledgling. And it gains flying until end of turn. I actually think this card's really strong. The fact that it can end up in 3 turns being a 4/4 flyer as long as you're hitting your land drops is pretty impressive for 2 mana.
Yeah, this makes me want to play Landfall a lot more. It's like a much more legit threat, and it attacks for 2 in the air, like the turn after you play it, which for your 2-drop is fine. If you are playing... I mean, I guess Modern is like the only fetch land format now, but if you were able to fetch, you could it gets pretty out of hand.
Right.
I don't think it's good enough for Modern, unfortunately, but if,
Fabled Passage is still the most played land in multiple formats, right?
Cracking your Fabled Passage on turn 3 is pretty awkward, though.
Sure.
I mean, it's doable, I guess.
Well,
you could go Fledgling into Fledgling Fabled Passage or something and have 2 3/3s.
Or just Fledgling, swing for 2 on turn 3 with your land, play something good, or even Fledgling, turn 3 play, not Kadama's Reach, whatever, that new cultivate into 4-drop, right? There's other things you can do to put lands into play.
It's an aggro deck, though, or
Sure.
This is an aggro card. I don't think you want to be playing it in the same deck as Cultivate. And honestly, I think Fabled Passage in a lot of Fledgling decks is going to be awkward.
Do you think... we'll have this conversation, especially when we get to Akoum Hellhound in a second. Actually, let's wait till there, because I'm going to bring it up there. But remember this Fledgling, this little Fearless Fledgling when we get over there.
I mean, I guess that's what's interesting about this iteration of Landfall is it's the first time that we've had Landfall in Standard with no fetch lands. And so... they're able to push the power level to something to a level that's appealing, like Fearless Fledgling. But then it's if I'm a white weenie deck, how many land drops am I going to hit over the course of a game? If I don't play this right on turn 2, is it good? And if I do play it on turn 2, is it going to be super impressive if I only hit my 3rd land drop or something, or my 4th land drop? I don't know. It's interesting because in original Zendikar, BFC, the cards were just not good enough to see standard play, right? We already kind of discussed that. But But in original Zendikar, it was turn 1 step links, turn 2 fetch land, attack for 4, play to GOP, turn 3 fetch land, attack for 8,000. But when you have those power level of landfall cards, but you don't have the fetch lands, are the aggressive ones good?
So I guess my one question is, and I was going to wait, but we can talk about it now. I feel like Evolving Wilds, Field of Ruin, and obviously Fabled Passage all get more of a look for standard play with that then, right? If you're only playing 1 and 2, if you're playing pretty aggressive threats and 1 and 2 drops, and you're literally just playing Evolving Wilds as a double buff or on turn 3 so you can get to your 4-drop or whatever, I think that sees a lot more play. And especially with some of their bigger, the next card, Felidar Retreat, this is a card where like your Evolving Wilds is doing a lot more work. You're getting 2/2/2s out of it, even if you have to like you're playing it as a card that you either play on turn 1 just to like get out of the way, or you play on turn 5. And Fable Passage on turn 3 is not the best, but it's not that bad if you're playing mostly 1 and 2 drops.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's like kind of mid-rangey decks that have this as like a cheap threat, and then they're playing some more expensive cards. Also, like as you guys discussed last week, like I think a lot of decks, including aggro decks, are just going to be able to play more lands because they'll play the modal DFCs, like Kazandu Mammoth, which I assume you talked about yesterday, but we'll cover again today. But like Fearless Fledgling and Kazandu Mammoth. I mean, Kazandu Mammoth with literally any landfall card is just best friends because it could be a land if you have a bunch of landfall triggers, and that's more valuable to you than a 3/3, and it's a 3/3 so that you don't flood out. Like it allows you to continue hitting landfall. Like I guess this is how a lot of the modal DFCs are. Is like, you know, you already discussed last week about like at their core they're just very good, but when you're playing landfall it's even better because sometimes late in the game you really do just want to top deck a land because it puts like a +1/+1 counter on 2 of your creatures, and it gives your other creature +2/+2, and it makes a 2/2 or whatever, and you really just want to draw a land, and you would much rather draw a land than a 3/3. So what if you had a card that was both?
Next card, mentioned it, Felidar Retreat, 3 and a white enchantment, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. This card does a lot of powerful things, right? Like in some ways it feels really similar to Gideon. The 4-mana one to me, where he like it's missing his third mode, right? But it's like permanently pumping all your creatures, or pretty consistently pumping out 2/2s every turn. And then I guess like instead of getting a 6/6, you get vigilance, and and there's like much less ways to kill this versus a Gideon.
So yeah, I mean this is like super Retreat to Emeria, which we already discussed. Like, you know, it was at least playable in
30 seconds ago, 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, it was playable in a little bit of Commander, maybe some janky Standard. But this is just like twice as good. It makes 2/2s instead of 1/1s, and it puts counters on all your stuff instead of end of turn stuff. I guess the comparison with Gideon is that like Gideon, you get a guaranteed thing every turn, pretty much. I mean, obviously they can kill it. This card, it's easy to look at these landfall cards and just be like, oh, you get it every turn. But you don't really, right? Like you play this when you hit 4 mana, but you're not going to play a land every single turn until you have 8 mana, probably, right? I mean, that's pretty unlikely. Like if you think about games that go 8 turns, you're not hitting all 8 of those land drops. So this card isn't really making you a 2/2 every turn for 4 turns. It's making you a 2/2 2 or 3 turns out of 4, maybe. I mean, I guess like in these decks that are playing 38 lands, it's more likely, but I don't know.
It's interesting because it's similar to getting like as a control finisher or as a control card, that's great, right? I like play a land, I'm getting free things for my lands that I'm playing, getting free threats that my opponent now has to deal with, or that can block for me, right? It can do a small Field of the Dead impression. Also, I mean, I guess speaking of Field of the Dead, this does do an interesting kind of in Bant ramp strategies where you just are playing this because you know you're going to play stuff like Uro and stuff like not Kodama's Reach.
Yeah, so what I like about this card is this is a deck where you do want to just hit like infinity land drops, and it's good, right? Like Fearless Fledgling strikes me as a deck where if you're trying to hit infinity land drops, it's not going to be good in your deck. Fearless Fledgling is like an aggro card that you want to play in a deck where you're probably only hitting like 5 or 6 land drops. But Felidar Retreat looks like a card that I would put in a deck where I want to hit lots and lots of land drops. And like Fearless Fledgling decks might board it in or something against sweepers or against decks with a lot of removal or something because it's inevitability. But like as a main deck card, yeah, I think slower, maybe more Uro-y decks or ramp decks, it looks good because it's like a great win con all by itself and it blocks.
Right. Next card is Makindi Ox, 4 and a white, 4/4. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature an opponent controls. This is a draft card. It's a medium draft card. I'm going to move on with my life unless...
It's see in draft. Classic.
It's not even a Herda, so I can't even like bring it back to the it killing Mufasa. It does nothing for me.
So it is an ox in the grand tradition of Bruce Tarl yelling at oxes.
Yes.
Oxen, I guess.
That is true.
Before he had a commander card, they printed Pillarfield Ox in a few core sets, and every single time it had different flavor text from Bruce Tarl just like yelling at it for being so stubborn. And then in BFZ, there was an Ox that had Bruce Tarl flavor text, and then they made him a card. But now he's like a meme. I mean, I guess he was a meme, and that's how he became a card. But
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay. And it does have Bruce Tarl flavor text. Okay,
yeah, I'm into it. Classic.
Look at that. McKinney Ox just saved himself. Is now in the episode. There was a second when we were going to have Marshall cut him, but he's back with
Canyon
flavor
Jerboa
text.
has Bruce Tarl flavor text too, but I don't care because it's not an Ox.
All right, we're on the blue now. Ruin Crab, which ruined my life. It's 1 blue for a 0/3 crab landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards.
8 crab.
You can do if they're all snow permanents, you could do 12 crab now.
Yeah, but that crab costs 2 mana.
That's bad. Loose. 8 crab it is.
Everyone knows that what you're supposed to do with these crabs is play fetch lands, right? So like the snow crab only gets 1 trigger off of a fetch.
It's pretty bad. But Ruin Crab is here for us in spirit, if not in the ability to mill myself. I think this card is going to be... I mean, like, one thing to remember about Hedron Crab is that it was, like, almost a first pickable card in Zendikar Draft and was the only reason to play blue in that limited format. Blue was the worst color and by a wide margin. And the reason for that is because milling someone out with a Hedron Crab was not difficult at all. If you were able to put up any defense, they mill your opponent very quickly. And so this Hedron Crab on turn 1, if you get 2 of them, can be bonkers.
There's also a lot of incidental mill because of the rogue mechanic in the set, where like a lot of the rogues want your opponent to have 8 cards in their graveyard. So there's a lot of rogues that's like when this hits your opponent, they mill 1, or like when this enters the battlefield, they mill 2, or there's even like the 2 mana, I guess it's at rare, but it's like 2 mana, they mill 8, and then you can kick it to make them mill half their deck. So there's like a bunch of random mill cards in the set, in part because of this rogue mechanic. Mm-hmm. So if you have like a Ruin Crab rogue deck in limited, I think that's strong. And that might even carry over to constructed. I mean, like, this is probably the most efficient way that exists in standard to get your opponent to 8 cards in their graveyard.
Well,
right?
there's a 2-card combo, right? With there's the 3 blue mana mill your opponent. Well, actually, there's a lot of very good mill cards in standard, right? Because there's even the 0/4 adventure, but there's the commander that is also a creature that is just a standard legal creature that like doubles all mill, right? Like if you mill someone, mill twice as much.
Bruvac was in Jumpstart.
He was in Jumpstart. Cool.
So you can play that in Historic.
So in Historic, you can play Bruvac, and then you can play the card you just mentioned, the 2 mana kicker, mill half their deck.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's an instant kill.
That's spicy. But I'm thinking like Ruin Crab. So Merfolk Secret Keeper, you're right, is very good. Has seen standard play, was good in draft. It was a common, so it was like better in draft, I guess, because you could get a lot of them. But
debate. Yeah. This one card does more work, but getting more of them is harder. Yeah.
Right. You could just have like 4 Merfolk Secret Keepers and ways to bounce them back to your hand, but you're probably only getting a couple of Ruin Crabs.
But that one Ruin Crab is going to do a lot.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking is like in standard, if you're this is like kind of worth a card, like it kind of blocks on the ground and it mills like very efficiently. So if you are some sort of deck like with Drown in the Lock and some of these rogue cards, maybe that's cool. And if you're a historic mill deck, now that we're talking about Bruvac with this Traumatize card or whatever it's called, it does the Traumatize thing. Like Ruin Crab probably goes in that deck as like another way to win in case you don't draw your combo or whatever. You only draw 1/2.
Skyclave Shade. Here we go. 1 and a black. Kicker 2 and a black. Skyclave Shade can't block. If Skyclave Shade was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, if Skyclave Shade is in your graveyard and it's your turn, you may cast it from your graveyard this turn. It is a 3/1. I don't know if I brought that up. So this is Bloodghast 2.0. And this was actually probably the card we've gotten the most questions on what our thoughts are on it. So I have a few thoughts. Obviously, it's not as good as Bloodghast. Bloodghast is a format-defining card in a way that many cards will never be. And this I don't think is at that parallel. This does do some things differently and better than Bloodghast. One of them is it allows you to cast it. So in Modern, one of the issues that Bloodghast and Vengevine always have with each other is Bloodghast doesn't trigger Vengevine. It's just a worse Vengevine that you can get back. And this is a card that you can use to trigger Vengevine from your graveyard without doing too much work. So you can use Hedge and Crab to mill yourself, and then you can play this plus a 1-drop on your turn 3 if you had milled this into your graveyard, getting both it back and Vengevine back. The other one is late game. In some ways, it's better than Bloodghast because you can bring it in as a 5/3 versus for 5 mana versus a 3/1 for 2 mana. So it scales up a little bit.
Yeah, I like that it scales up. It looks like because they're making you pay mana, they're like, we're going to give you a card that is not just worse than Bloodghast, but we would like you to play it fairly, please. You must pay mana for it. We will reward you for your mana investment, but you must pay.
Right.
Free cards, not good. Bloodghast is free, no good. Please pay mana. We will give you a reward for it.
and I do think, like, for Standard and Historic, this is kind of a cool card, right? In Historic, definitely there's different ways to put it. The graveyard, also singleton formats on Arena or in general. This is definitely a card to be added.
I think your point about it bringing back Vengevine is cool, though. I mean, that is a situation where it can be better than Bloodghast. Even in like unfair decks that are like cheating Vengevines into play. This is cool because like Vengevine decks are often looking for creatures you can play out of your graveyard because you always have like a massive graveyard, but you don't have a huge hand. So being able to like use the resources available to you to get Vengevine back seems really cool.
The amount of Golgari Thugs that I have cast just to get Vengevines back, and this does that without like 3 turns of setup, makes me like this card a lot at a bare minimum. So yeah, I'm pretty excited by it.
I think like it's not as explosive as Bloodghast because it is constrained by your mana in a way that Bloodghast is not. So it's not replacing Bloodghast anywhere except maybe some spicy Vengevine lists, but it will be good in formats where Bloodghast isn't legal, or even in like decks that are just not as all in as like decks that play Bloodghast.
Right.
Because decks that play Bloodghast, like Bloodghast is not that good, right? It's like a 2/1 that can't block.
Sometimes has haste.
It's not a super. Sometimes has haste. It's like not a super relevant card. It's just like its only use is like unfair, where you're just like dumping wholesale cards in your graveyard and just getting back like a massive army of random idiots, like 2/1s and 1/1s and 3/3s and stuff. And this card is not good at doing that, but it is good at just like, I play it on turn 2, I attack a couple of times, it trades off or eats a removal spell, I get it back on turn 5, it's freaking big. Like,
right. Like this is actually maybe even a better, like, just generic standard card. Or like generic constructed card than Bloodghast. Like Bloodghast needs the deck to be all in on the self-mill plan to become powerful to an extent that it is powerful. And when it's doing that, it's insane because it's just this free card you have available to you.
So the one thing that Bloodghast has on this, other than that, is that in Standard it was a vampire, and so it got played because it was a vampire.
Yes, yeah. Well, that was its main. In Standard, it mostly saw play as that, but I could see a bunch of different decks that exist right now thinking of playing this. The Sacrifice deck, this is like a decent card in that deck just because it's great fuel for sacrificing. It's really easy to get it back. It's not an embarrassing threat on turn 2 or on turn 5.
Yeah, no, it's not at all, for sure. And the fact that it's hard to get rid of in like that obnoxious Uro way. I mean, obviously it doesn't just like 2-for-1 them every time you cast it, which is good. Cards probably shouldn't do that, but this is like much easier to get back over and over. Like you can just get this back. Like, keep answering my Skyclave Shade. What you got? And I have mentioned that it's like you're not going to hit every land drop in every game. But that said, sometimes you're going to draw your Kazandu Mammoth, and you're going to be like, you know what? I'd rather have a 5/3 than this Kazandu Mammoth. Play it as a land, get my 5/3. Like,
well, and this doesn't require you to hit your land drop every turn for value, right? That's something that you need your land drop once, and now you got the value.
And you can hold lands to get this back later.
Right. Like versus Felidar Retreat, where if you're not hitting your land every turn, or Fearless, or even worse, Fearless Fledgling, like this card is bad unless you're consistently hitting land drops to get it bigger and give it flying. But I think this is one of my favorite cards from the set so far. I do think that we mentioned it earlier, but the red land that can gut shot a thing for 1 red mana, I guess Hornet Sting, but then exiles it, Needle Drop, I don't know, makes this worse, right? Like that card is I feel like is going to see a lot of play, at least until Uro is banned, because it's a good answer to Uro, but also it's just like a generically good removal spell a lot of the time. It gets rid of a lot of utility creatures. And then
I don't know. I think
it's
format dependent. Like the fact that it hits Uro is points for it, but I don't think that I would play it just to deal with Uro. Like I don't think it's a very efficient way to deal with Uro.
Sure. Well, the benefit is that it's always worst case scenario, just a land you play tapped, right? Like that's
yeah.
Like
but like the Uro decks that exist in pretty much every format, if they're just like 2-for-1ing you with their Uro, they're just gonna win.
Well, but you're up on mana, right? Like they spent 3 mana to play an extra land and draw a card and gain 3 life, and you've spent 1 card to make it so they didn't draw 2 cards. They drew 1 card, I guess, but that 1 card is like very strong and inevitable.
They gained 3 though. That's the tricky part. They gained 3.
Sure. I think I'm more thinking of like the Jund Sacrifice decks playing that card less than like mono red aggro. I think mono red aggro is losing to Uro decks.
Sometimes
help,
you just kill them. You
kill them first.
Them.
Yeah.
You cleave them.
Throw
it's
the
like,
cleave at them.
You gain 9 life off your Uro this game. Here's my Ember Cleave on my 10/10 Anax. Die.
Right. Fair enough. All right. Well, speaking of red, Akoum Hellhound. 1 red, 0/1, elemental dog. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Akoum Hellhound gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Dogs have their own step links. I'm just seeing
dogs. Dogs rise up.
It's interesting that this is an elemental hound dog versus, I guess there were a bunch of hellhounds on Zendikar originally, and maybe not many just regular dogs.
Here's my Akoum Hellhound.
Nice. I can see some land has fallen. So Peanut,
she's getting +2/+2.
They're a 2/3 right now.
Put her back over here.
Peanut Cam. It's great. This mirror is actually wonderful because I've just been distracted watching Peanut adventure on your bed throughout the podcast, and I hope.
I know. I'm keeping her up. She was taking a nap.
For those who don't know, Step Links was a standard level consistent player. Like it just is a very efficient threat. A 1 mana 2/3 is good, and
it's not playing Modern for a long time in Naya Zoo decks, which I am a Wild Nacatl fan. Not even fan. Just like I think that it deserves better. But anyway, Wild Nacatl decks used to play Step Links because you're just playing like 12 plus fetches and just like taking a million damage off your mana base, but your creatures are so huge because you're playing Wild Nacatl, which is a 3/3 for 1. You're playing Step Links, which is a 4/5 for 1, and this, which can be a 4/5 for 1 with fetches. I do think that all those Naya Zoo players in Modern whose deck is not well positioned and hasn't been for a long time, they are very happy to see this. As far as Standard goes, I think without fetches, this doesn't do it for me.
I will say someone did send us a list recently that was Naya Modern Zoo and was playing Wild Nacatls and wanted me and you to talk about it. And I forgot to make a note of it and save the deck list to show you because this. Oh yeah, the moment.
Well they tagged me on Twitter. It was a Saffron Olive deck or something.
Maybe.
Right?
So that's a deck that does exist. People are making the Nacatl work. Nactl.
Or no, it's on Goldfish. It's not. Oh okay. Yeah, it's Landfall Zoo by Saffron Olive. I don't know where it came from, but it's Luris. What's some
companion
Zoo?
Luris Zoo.
Yeah, it's a Luris companion, Luris Zoo, with 4 of these guys, 4 Goblin Guide, 4 Step Links, 4 Wayward Guide Beast, which is the
new Goblin
Guide with Trample from this set, that when it attacks, you return a land to your hand from the battlefield. 4 Wild Nicatl, 4 Brushfire Elemental, which we'll get to, 4 Plated Geopede, 4 Lightning Bolt, 4 Tarka's Command, 4 Skyclave Pickaxe, which we'll get to. It's a landfall card.
Yep,
yes,
it's down here.
Yep, and that's the deck. And then you're playing 10, 11, 15 fetch lands. you're playing 15 fetch lands and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fetchable lands. But by the time you've hit your 6th land drop, if you haven't won, you're dead. So it's fine.
Right.
Yeah. So I like that. Like, I think that's cool. And I know that like Saffron Olive is very good at coming up with cool ideas like that. He's not necessarily like a tuner. Like, that's probably not the most tuned list. It's just a bunch of 4-ofs of like cards that are obviously say landfall on them. But I think, I think like that seems reasonable to me in Modern. I don't know if it's like the best, but I think you could take it to an FNM and do some damage.
And I think there's an argument for some type of Naya landfall deck in Standard, or maybe better Historic, that does take advantage of like not really planning on having more than 2 lands in play untapped, and like try and play the different fetch lands between Fill the Dead, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Historic, and
Fabled Passage.
Plus,
I just think this is not the card I want to play with Fabled Passage. Like, in a Fabled Passage deck, I want to be triggering Felidar Retreat with my Fabled Passage.
Sure.
Or even Skyclave Shade with my Fabled Passage. Akoum Hellhound is not I'm not as excited about triggering that with Fabled Passage.
Fair. That's fair.
Like, all these wonky tapped lands in my aggro deck. I mean, I guess, like, in the previous Standard, people were playing a lot of 1/1s for 1 in the red aggro decks.
I think this is just a 2/3 for 1 is like maybe just fine in Standard in mono red if there's enough pieces.
Don't get too excited. It's not a 2/3 for 1, but yeah, I mean, maybe it just does enough. Like, maybe it does more than like Grim Initiate, or like some of these random 1/1 goblin doofers. I'm trying to remember the names.
Especially because you can now play more lands in those decks, because some of them can be spells, right? That are like a little bit more situational.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess, yeah. And like the mono red decks in Standard are a little bit bigger because they are playing like Anax and Embercleave and some more expensive stuff that they often get to a higher land count.
Yep. All right, next card. Because this is a card that Fabled Passage sounds dope next to.
Yeah.
Moraug, Fury of Akoum. 4 red. Legendary creature, Minotaur Warrior. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn. It is a 6/6, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there is an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So, people are going to get got the first time they play this card, and I want to make sure all of our listeners understand the right way to play with this. Do not play your lands in your first main phase. The way this card works is that your extra man, if you play a land in your first man phase, you're going to get an extra combat step. It's going to happen before your normal combat step. Your creatures are going to untap, then you're going to attack with them, and then your normal combat step is going to happen, and they're not going to untap. So your extra combat step, unless you're like accidentally playing with vigilance creatures, doesn't matter. What you want to do is attack, regular combat step, then in your second second main phase, play as many lands as you possibly can, and then take all of the attack steps you want where they untap, and then you can take advantage of it.
So I guess that subtle wording affects this kind of a lot, because you want to attack with this because it's a 6/6. So if you don't hit your first land drop, you attack with this in your combat, which that's playing correctly, right? Because you want to get both your combats. You want to untap your creatures and swing twice. You swing with this. If it dies in combat, or if they have like a Seal Away or a Settle the Wreckage or something in formats where those are legal, then you're out of luck. You play your land in your second main and nothing happens because your creature died. So that is something to note. I guess, if you're playing with this guy. Like, maybe sometimes it's right to just hold him back if you need the combat like that badly. I don't know.
Regardless, it gives all of the other creatures you attack with during that combat +1/+0 for that first combat. Because as soon as they attack, they now get +1/+0. So it's not like if you hold back with it for the first attack step, because you're expecting to get additional attack steps with them. And so I don't think you need to be too sad that you held back on one of the attacks. It almost is like a little bit of a power nerf. It makes that a little scarier to do. And I would almost say you're right not to attack, because you're going to get that extra attack step if you have a land. And if you don't have a land, then you should just attack with them because it doesn't matter.
Bluffed them.
Yeah, you will get bluffed. Got bluffed. This card's sweet, though. I'm excited for it in Commander. I'm excited for it.
It's also interesting, I guess, that like if you attack with him, I'm thinking this through. So this is something that they're doing to like reduce arena clutter, and like random priority passes in arena. So this is just a static each creature you control gets. It's not like whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 for each time it attacked this turn. Like that's how they might have worded it like 5 years ago. Because this is static, if they do remove it in combat, like in that first combat, you will lose the buff. So don't rely on it. If you need that +1/+0 to trade with blockers, and you attack with this guy, and you're like going all in, and they have their removal spell for this guy to like, they'll turn off your second combat, they'll blow you out in combat because your creatures will all get smaller. You'll be sad all around. So keep in mind that's also a static. This guy is very finicky.
But I think part of that is the cost of having a 6/6 that pumps your entire team and gets you extra combat steps every turn. Like
multiple extra combat steps a lot of the time.
There are parts of this card that are Titan-esque, right? Like not the turn you play him, probably, but from every turn past that, he has the ETB of extra combat stuff plus giving all of your creatures +1/+0, as long as you can play him and a land in the same turn.
Yeah, I mean, like you can play him on turn 7 and then a land. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out like what kind of competitive deck I want to put this guy in, and I don't know if one exists, but I'm not looking forward to playing against this in Commander. This is the kind of Commander card that just makes me groan.
I'm excited about this card. I mean, maybe I won't be, but like it's just an aggressive deck. You can just remove it with removal spells. You have a mono red deck. Also, you can take advantage of this card by using it to untap things. Can't you? Don't you have cool untap? Like, because I remember Jules Robbins, who now works at Wizards, used to have a really cool Aurelia deck that's whole game plan wasn't the fact that Aurelia gave you extra combat steps. It was that she untapped your creatures twice a turn in red and white. And this does that, but better. He's also on the Commander Council for red. This feels like Jules made this card.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of taking more than one combat in a turn. It just feels weird to me. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of, I mean, a lot of the time people are like going infinite or whatever, sort of feast and famine with the card the enchantment that lets you pay. I feel like taking more than 2 combats is excessive. I'm not into it.
I think this is less breakable than those can be, right?
So you're not going infinite with this, but how many combats do you need to win the game?
Sure.
And like in a Commander game where this is in your red-green deck, how many combats do you think you can reasonably take? Because it's probably a lot.
It's a lot of combats.
Like even just you slam this turn 6 with a couple creatures out. Like on turn 7, you could just play Boundless Realms or something. Like God knows, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like putting this into Borogamos, right? Like I have Scapeshift in there. I have like
you'll probably have Nahiri's Lithomancy,
absolutely, that card's so cool. I'm excited about that card. If we have time, we might do some rando cards because there's actually not that much landfall cards. Next card on the list. Valakut Exploration, 2 and a red, enchantment, landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. At the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, put them into your owner's graveyard. Then Valakut Exploration deals that much damage to each opponent. This is a land? No, it's not a land. This card is sweet, though. Was there landfall draw card? I don't know if that existed.
There was Seer's Sundial, which I have played in like
Where you
mono
can
red
pay
or mono white
mana,
commander decks
sure.
before.
Yeah, yep.
But you had to pay to draw the card. There was not just like landfall draw a card.
And so this is that technically, right? It's not as good as that, but it's the red version of that, which is fine now.
So the thing I like about this card in particular is that in a lot of these decks where I say like you won't hit every single land drop forever because you're only drawing one card a turn. If it's a spell, you're going to cast it. And you're just not going to draw a land every single turn. If you do draw a land every single turn, you're probably going to lose. This card makes it so like you do kind of want to draw a land every single turn. You draw a land, you play it, you get to exile a card and play hopefully a non-land. So
right.
It like smooths out your draws because now you're like drawing more spells. And if you do hit a land, you play it, and now hopefully you're getting a spell. It gives you like an extra shot at spells every turn while allowing you to like hit landfall every turn. It's also like pretty cool in multiples.
Yeah.
Because now you're digging super deep when you play a land. It's also good like if you have access to extra land drops, which there are surprisingly few of in the set. Maybe that's on purpose to prevent this like fetch land problem we were talking about, where like if you make it too easy, the cards are too good.
Right. But I mean, like casting not exploration. What's the card? Why can't I remember it? Exploration. No. Kadama's
What does it do?
But it doesn't have Arcana.
Oh, cultivate.
Cultivate. Thank you so much. Like cultivate does exist in standard, and then obviously leaving standard, looking at historic or modern, right? Like this card, this is not that unplayable in modern, right? Like and with fetch lands, this card's really good. You draw 2 cards a turn with a fetch land. You play this often on turn 2 or 3, and it's like a very difficult, basically Dark Confidant that's in play, and that also instead of doing damage to you, will do 1 to 2 damage to your opponent every turn out of Jund. That's not an unplayable card to me.
It just competes with like Tireless Tracker, right? And Planeswalkers. Sure. Those are the things that it's competing with.
Yeah. But I don't think that's necessarily I think this does something powerful enough and different enough than those cards that it's worth considering.
I mean, this effect is worse than Get a Clue, I think. Because you can store clues across turns. You don't just like lose it on your end step if you don't play the cards immediately. The kicker is you have to pay to get the cards.
It's cheaper than clues, and so you get
Tireless
the cards
Tracker also attacks and blocks,
but it also dies to many things under the sun. Well, this doesn't.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm not saying Tireless Tracker isn't better, because Tireless Tracker is like an all-time great card, but I think this card, there are situations where I would play this over Tireless Tracker. I would be much happier having this, and they're not that uncommon.
It's close enough to Tireless Tracker that it's exciting, I guess, is what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, right. And I think like also in black red, I mean, on the other hand, for historic and standard formats without Tireless Tracker, the fact that we're comparing this card to Tireless Tracker, every format it's ever been in, modern or earlier, staple to some variety, including Commander, like that's a pretty good bar to be at.
Yeah. Tireless Tracker, I think, is if a card comes out and you can like compare it to Tireless Tracker and not be like it's not that much worse, that's good. I think that's a good card.
It's where you want to be as a card. I strive to be as a person as good as Tireless Tracker. Yes. Giving clues to people, getting swole.
Be the Tireless Tracker you want to see in the world.
Right, exactly. Kazandu Mammoth, 1 green, elephant. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Kazandu Mammoth gets +2/+2 until end of turn. It is a rare 3/3 elephant, but whenever you feel like it, it could be a tapped green mana source. Comes into play as a land. This card is good. I think it's a good card. I think we talked about it a lot last week, so I would love to hear your thoughts, Michael, since I gave my thoughts last week.
Yeah, it's a great mid-range threat, and perhaps even aggro threat if there is like a landfall, more aggressive deck in standard. I don't think it really excites me outside of standard, maybe historic, but I don't think it makes it as far as Pioneer to me. Maybe I'm underestimating these flippy cards. I just think that it like a 3/3 that turns into a 5/5 landfall for 3 that like doesn't do anything. They can just kill it. And like a tapped land is going to affect your development a lot in formats once you start getting to Pioneer and beyond. But I think it's going to be a major player in Standard.
I think in Modern and/or Pioneer, the mono green stompy era is a card that this could see play, or Devotion, right? Like it has the ability to participate in those decks because
what kind of three drops are those decks playing currently? I guess like what does this have to compete with?
Groundbreaker, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think that those.
They're not
those aren't major players in their respective formats. But even as fringe players, I would want to see what this is competing with for the 3-drop slot because it is cool that it's a land.
I think what I would do in those decks, especially because a lot of the times what those decks can run into is just like flooding themselves at times, is having, especially the mono green Devotion decks, because everything they do is just like a dirtily threat that just gets really big really quickly. Having the ability to have some of your lands be like land creatures basically, and have the option late game to play this or early game to play it as a land, I think is worth it.
I guess you can just like cut 2 forest for 2 mammoth.
Right. And just
maybe that's not terrible.
A few games you might get wrecked, but like most of the time you'll be happy to be able to play this on turn 3 when you play a 2-drop or your second 2-drop, or turn 4 when you play your second 3-drop or a 3-drop. I
guess I do think that tapped lands, like especially in Modern, can be pretty brutal if you're trying to curve out in a deck like that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So like also, I think
is this worth playing?
I didn't get to talk about this, but the flippy cards like that I like the most, especially for like older formats, are the ones where like you can add them to your deck as lands. Like Kazandu Mammoth is something I want to subtract. Like I guess I'll do my spiel since I wasn't on the episode last week, but you guys probably already talked about this. But my spiel on these flippy cards is on the modal DFCs is there's 2 types. And it's not clear that there's 2 types because they all look the same when you like glance at them. One type is, I want to cut lands for this. Oh. That's the mammoth, right? Like you want to cut lands for this mammoth because if you are playing like 30 lands with the mammoth, it like you're still flooding. This mammoth doesn't like help you spend your mana. It's just like a 3-drop that is not super impactful if you're flooded out. And there's cards that make me want to
cut spells for this
to go up to like 28, 29 lands. And that's cards like the Regrowth.
The red draw card cycler that can cycle your hand. You can put cards on the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Like stuff like that. I want to add lands to my deck effectively by cutting spells for them, because they help you when you're flooding out. This mammoth is something I want to cut lands for, but the problem with the ones that you want to cut lands for is you're cutting lands for them, but you can't cut too many because you don't want all these ETB tapped lands.
Depends on the deck, right? But yes, yeah. Like
I think in general that's true. The one exception is like this mammoth plays very well with itself because like you can kind of cut spells for this mammoth or cut lands for this mammoth. Sorry. You can cut spells for the mammoth and thereby adding lands to your landfall deck, but still having like action, right? Like you're not going to have 5 land opener because that's bad. But if you go like 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, land, like you win. So it helps you hit late land drops when you need them, but it also is like a 3-mana doof that, you know, attacks and blocks and does the things you want on turn 3.
Right. And I think what I mentioned there are 3 types. I think yes, those are the 2 main ways. And then what we were looking at also was when we were evaluating was there's like, it looks like they printed 3 types of these in the sense that there's cards that are good late, but bad early, right? Where like or cards you want to hold on till as late as possible in the game. So these are cards that are great at the top deck, but if you get them on turn 1 through 3, you have no problem just playing it as a land. There were cards that are situational and then could be a land. So the shock, the do 1 damage to something is an example, where it's like this card is versatile, but it almost these are the cards that like feel like they're designed for best of 1, right? Like this card is good against some matchups, but bad against others. But the matchup that's bad against, I can just play it as a land. And then there's the third version that like creates a tension on, do I want to play this as a land or play this card early? And that's like the Force Spike variant or the bird, not the bird of paradise, but the Llanowar elf for 2 mana, the hedging crab boy.
So the situational cards to me, I mean, a lot of the mana sinks are situational, I would say. Like the regrowth is somewhat situational, where like you don't always have a good card in your graveyard because like, you know, you've been playing to the board or whatever, or like, you know, it's early game and you haven't played that much stuff and you just play it as a land. And I also think that like some of the just like big creatures, there's like a 6-drop 4/5 trample or something that is a land, and I think that card is like pretty good because, you know, when you're flooded out you do want to play it, and I think like it might even be good enough for standard even though it's just like a 6-mana 4/5. But yeah, I guess like a lot of the situational cards to me end up as cards that I cut spells for. Cards I cut lands for most of the time, because a lot of them are just like cheap, efficient, but situational.
Mm-hmm.
Like the red one and the white one that's like deal damage equal to the number of creatures you control to any target or target creature or planeswalker, which that's really cool. White burn spell. Did you guys talk about that?
You can talk about it. We drifted over it maybe a little quicker than we should have.
That's a white burn spell, y'all. Usually creatures have to be attacking or blocking for white to hit them with the burn spell. This is target creature or planeswalker equal to number of creatures you control. That's some new white technology. But it's situational, right? If your opponent is playing a bunch of removal or they're a control deck with no creatures. But that's a card that I want to cut a land for, I think, because it's cheap and efficient, and like I don't want to draw it when I'm flooding out. I want to play it, you know, I want to draw it when I'm screwed because I can play it as a land, or I guess I don't want to draw it when I'm screwed, but
right. I think yeah, it was cool going kind of over them. Where we kind of where I'm at is I think these cards are amazing, right? Like I was the one that was
I think they're
towards.
good.
They're like companion level, not companion level, power level. In the like they will need to be errated, but I think they will see as much play in some ways as companions saw. They're just not going to be as detrimental to the games that they're seeing play in, and as defining to each game that they're seeing play in. And force decks to be companion-based decks. But I do think, like, there's a lot of decks that just, there's good arguments that they should just be playing one or two of these regardless.
What were your top picks for, like, eternal formats?
We didn't rank, really, kind of because we slowed down ranking. If I were to pick now, I don't know. Let me play with the cards first.
I don't mean rank, like, explicitly, but I mean, like...
We were very high on all of the not all of the untapped ones, but many of the untapped ones, the shock ones, for different reasons. I think we came out with green being the best one, just because of its interaction with Primeval Titan decks and the ability to like use a bounce land to get it back, to find a Primeval Titan. Also, the red and black one in Death Shadow we were pretty hyped on, both because they both interact with that deck positively. I'm excited by the 1-mana damage one. I'm really excited by the red draw one. The fact that you can instant speed draw a card, just like it's a cantrip at instant speed, worst case scenario, at its worst level, is good to me in red, where it also can then get rid of a bunch of lands or cards you don't want. And then Ben was really hyped on the blue one. The one that, like, look at the top 7 cards, grab an instant or sorcery, or grab a sorcery, instant speed.
Okay.
I think we're the ones that I'm remembering off the top of my head, being semi-unprepared for this question.
Yeah, no worries. You're like, if your claim is that this is going to impact a lot of older formats, I was interested to hear what in particular was going to be the big hits. I agree. The like grab an instant or sorcery from the top, that card's super strong in like controlling decks because you want to hit all your land drops. This helps you hit all your land drops. You cut a spell for it. It replaces itself if you need action. It's just great and does everything you want. Like, it's great if you're screwed. It's great if you're flooded. It's great if you're neither. It just always does the thing. I think the regrowth is also like that. I think like 3-mana regrowth has never quite been enough, and that's the best regrowth we've gotten. But like, this is a 3-mana regrowth that is good and playable. Not good, I mean, it's a tapped ETB tapped single color land, but it's, you know, perfectly fine as a green source that you just play, you know, when regrowth isn't good, because regrowth is like a very conditional card, but when it's powerful, it's like backbreaking a lot of the time.
And I think our point with Balagad Recovery, which is the regrowth one, I've now looked up these cards, is in Amulet Titan decks, which I think we talked a lot about, right? Like there's a lot of different pieces. This is very powerful in that deck because you can use both. You have Amulet of Vigor that lets you play these lands untapped, so you have less of that issue. Plus, if you have 2 amulets, you can do the mana trick with them, so you get 1 mana out of them. But also being able to use a bounce land to return, if you're playing one of these, to your hand, to then be able to regrow your the creature pact to go get a primeval type, right? Like you can use it in cool chains like that let you go off, that I think was really powerful with it. But even just like the murder, like the Hagra mauling for 2 black, like there's just like weird ones of these that are so versatile that it's going to be really interesting to see. Ben was really hyped on the Malakir Rebirth on the situational side, but just like this protects a creature in a way. I'm just going through these.
Yeah, I guess Malakir Rebirth. Yeah, I mean, if you're like one of those decks that just wants to like have a threat and protect it or whatever, it can protect your Death Shadow or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, like that's kind of the majority. I mean, the other thing is obviously just the flip lands themselves. I think we ranked closer to Horizon lands than anything else. To choose which side they come into play. Was where we were at, but that's a different category than what we were really talking about. But we did talk about that last week as well.
Okay. Let's talk about Landfall. Sorry to recap for everybody who listened last week. My mistake.
Yeah, there's a whole episode if you want to go watch it.
I just wanted to hear like the top 3 where I'm like, Alex, you say these are going to see play in eternal formats. What's the top 3? I figured he would have it off the top.
I was unprepared.
Yeah.
Well, I also kind of my point is they're not format defining going to see play in a deck, right? It's more like the way they're like cards that you just include and you gain such free value from them that they're going to be more onesies and twosies depending on which deck you're playing. But I think most decks should consider playing them to some extent. One of these.
Yeah, just cut a spell for one or cut a land for one,
right?
And make your like ratios a little bit better without sacrificing that much.
Right. And even like in a sideboard capacity, and we didn't talk about this too much last week, so I guess this is new content. The ability for like, there are a lot of pros that have argued that every player should just play 1 Ghost Quarter in their sideboard, or like play a land in your sideboard is like generally actually probably a powerful thing you can do, and these let you do that plus get a sideboard card. In the same way that like Wear and Tear is a card that I've considered playing because it gives me 2 different sides of that card that are good in different matchups. Playing a land lets me, in decks that I just need to hit my land drops a little bit more, have access to that more control based matchups, or then have the draw card, the red draw extra cards, if I know I'm going to go late game at instant speed or whatever, or regrowth if I know I'm going to go against something that has a lot of removal. We are on a favorite of mine. Actually, this is the first value card I ever really had experience with, and that is Lotus Cobra. 1 and a green, creature snake, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color, 2/1. Famously, like, always good, not nearly as good as people thought it was when it was first created. I have distinct memories of like one of my first drafts ever, and it was the release of Zendikar, and Lotus Cobra, someone like ended up like laughably being the kid who ends like in hindsight was like the scummy kid who would rip kids off. Open Lotus Cobra, pack 1, pick 1, and just scooped out of the draft. And it was when it was kind of not known if that was allowed or what to do there. I mean, I think it was like a foil Lotus Cobra and something else of value, and a fetch land. Like I think it was like both in the pack, and it was
fetch lands were like $10 at the time. Like, get over yourself.
Well, Lotus Cobra was
Cobra and sell it for $70 or whatever, and buy 7 fetch lands. Who cares? Like,
and so like it was one of the interesting things where like people are like, oh, that's scummy, you shouldn't do that, but other people are like, well, if there's no rules against it, what are you gonna do? Debate. And yeah, distinct memories. I like love Lotus Cobra. You should put it in more commander decks. This card's really good.
What's cool is it's a downshift. So when Lotus Cobra first came out, it was like $30 and the foil was like 70 or something because
45.
Everybody was so hyped about it.
It was 45. I have a very distinct memory of what it was.
Got it. 45. But yeah, it was like crazy expensive for a mythic back then, like euro expensive, right?
It was the first, because Zendikar was the second block ever with mythics. It was Shards of Alara block, M10, and then Zendikar. And so it was the first time. It was also the first time that a mythic was previewed that people thought it was going to be a tournament staple outside of maybe in M10. Like Baneslayer Angel, but Baneslayer Angel was like a $50 card at the time, and then the Planeswalkers, but they were reprinted from Lorwyn, so everyone had them at rare values, so that wasn't really an issue. So it was like this weird, it was the first time before cards were ever played that a card that was mythic was expected to be just the most powerful card in the set, and then ended up not really being that defining of a player in the format. Even
it was good though.
I don't know, like it didn't because that standard
there were Lotus
era
Cobra
weird.
decks like throughout standard, even through like the Jund versus Jace wars,
right? Like because like Jund versus Jace, people were playing Lotus Cobra, but it was never defining. And then
it wasn't format defining, but it got played. Do you remember this was like a sweet deck I was talking to somebody about recently? I think it might have been when Lotus Cobra got previewed, and I was like, oh, there was like a sweet Lotus Cobra deck. It was the Turbo Land deck with like Time Warps and Jaces.
Yes, I do remember that deck. That deck was sweet.
Yeah, you like played a bunch of Time Warps and Jaces and Lotus Cobras and Avenger of Zendikars and Explorers, and then like you were just like blue-green, just like trying to ramp and like use your Lotus Cobra triggers to like chain Time Warps together with Oracle Moldiah.
Well, because you could also, because the fetch lands were in the format, you could turn 3 Time Warp.
Yeah.
Because you could fetch, get a land, get 2 land drops, you get 2 mana plus the land mana you played plus the 2 lands you played on turn 1 and turn 2. So that's like, that was the play. I also, like Lotus Cobra was in one of my favorite decks of all time in Standard, which was the Dredgevine decks. Like you played Lotus Cobras in that deck because the deck was like, Hedge and Crab into Lotus Cobra into fetch, and then play enough creatures to get the Vengevines that you've now milled over 2 turns into your grave, blah 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 blah. Card is sweet. I love Lotus Cobra. I'm super stoked, and I didn't actually even it didn't click that it was downshifted to rare. That's sweet as well. More people get to play
so it's not going to be like prohibitively expensive this time around.
And yeah, definitely a sweet card. Next card, which well, we'll talk in a second. Scute Swarm, 2 and a green, 1/1 insect. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm instead. The most, I get that Arena can handle this card, but I feel like this card is on a list of cards that could crash Arena higher than other cards.
There's definitely going to be some streamers like Scape Shifting Scute Swarm,
right?
Nahiri's Lithomancy decks to just be like, this program is going down.
Like every Yorok historic brawl deck is just playing this and Scape Shift. This card's sweet. I have no idea how playable it is. It's cool that it's like mini Avenger of Zendikar, and then it makes like extra Avengers of Zendikars. I think in Commander and older formats, like in Singleton formats, this is a card I would consider over Avenger. Like I'm gonna put this into Tamio, which is my lands blue-green deck, and it's gonna
doesn't
be
have
there.
A super powerful ETB. It's like it makes you a bunch of 1/1s over time instead of Avenger, which is like, here's all my 1/1s or 0/1s.
But just Avenger, you need to put it on. You need 7 mana. This you can play on turn 3 and just let it sit there innocuously until you have 6.
I get it, but even on turn 7, if you play this and it doesn't die, you've made 4. And Avenger, if you just waited, you would have gotten 7.
No. On turn 6, you play a land. So you'd play it on turn 3.
Oh, sure. You get 5.
So on turn 3, you play this. Turn 4, you get 1. Turn 5, you get 2. You have 2. Turn 3. Sorry. Yeah. Turn 1, you play this. Turn 2, you get 1
Wait,
token.
why are you playing this on turn 1?
Turn 3. Sorry. On turn 3, you play this. The turn 1 that it is in play. Turn 3. Then you play a land next turn. You have 1/1 insect. Then you have I'll count him for hymns and this for the insect. Turn 5, you have 2 insects. Turn 6, you have 2 mobs,
Scute, 2 insect.
2 insects. Turn That's turn 6. Turn 7, you now have 4 Scutes.
4 Scutes, 2 insects. All right. So I guess if it lives for that long, I mean, that's the problem, right? Is it has to live to keep doing the thing.
Sure, but so does Avenger. The other version of this is on turn 6, you play it, and then you play a land with priority, and now you have 2. And so now the only way to stop this shenanigans is with a Void Wipe. Or 2 removal spells.
Yeah, I guess. Avenger just it does the thing, right?
Yeah,
and a lot of times in Commander, you don't care about the power of your creatures because each creature is its own resource. Like you're playing it into Cathar's Crusade and your team's getting huge, or you're warp worlding, and the fact that Avenger just comes with all of this stuff and there's nothing your opponent can do about it, I think is very powerful. And Scute Swarm is just much slower to me. Not to say that it's bad, and I think any card that says Landfall Make a Dude is Commander playable. We even talked about the white one from Battle for Zendikar being Commander playable.
Right. And I'm currently playing the one that makes 0/1 plants that you can sack to Fog, I think, or get a land back from your graveyard, something.
Oh, Turn Timber Sower?
Yeah. And
yeah.
So, I think they're sweet. I'm excited by Scute Swarm. Skyclave Pickaxe, 1 green. Whenever it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Landfall, get +2/+2 until end of turn. Equipped 2 and a green. It's kind of Rancor, but worse by a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's very strong, for sure.
It's cool.
It was in that zoo deck that we were sent. Yes. The Landfall Zoo. Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely strong enough to see play in aggro decks. Adventuring Gear did see play back in the day. Mm-hmm. This is kind of, I mean, I think it's better.
I think it's better.
Not by a lot.
I think it's better.
Adventuring Gear, mana, for reference, is the same card as this. 1 to play, equipment, same landfall trigger, except it doesn't equip automatically. It's just 1 to equip. So this equips automatically, and then it's 3 to equip. So you get the first equip free, which is what's very powerful, because in the early turns, you're going to be 1-drop into Pickaxe equipped to my 1-drop, land, another 1-drop. That's the Pickaxe play, right? And that tempo of being able to play the second 1-drop, I feel pushes it to be better than Adventuring Gear to me.
I think the count against it is that Adventuring Gear was colorless, and the main deck it saw play then was red, white, Boros, Bushwhacker, aggro decks.
Sure. I think the green mana is now no longer ever going to be a problem, since we're not getting fetches in Standard, and older formats you can just fetch for duels. Who cares? You're just playing this in a zoo deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Territorial Scythecat, 2 and a green, 2 and a 1, trample, landfall. Whenever a land enters battlefield, you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Territorial Scythecat. It's interesting that this card and Skyclave Geopede exist. I guess they are different. One's +2/+2, and one is +1/+1, but otherwise they are. Oh, and Skyclave is a 3/1 versus this, which is a 2/1.
This gets a counter.
Yeah. I know.
They're also different rarities.
Common versus... Oh, I did not notice that they're different rarities. Yeah, sure.
I mean, they're kind of similar, but this one gets big and Geopede is faster at killing your opponent, I guess. It's a green version versus a red version of something similar.
Yeah. That's more. Brushfire Elemental, red and a green, Elemental Haste, 1/1. Brushfire Elemental can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, Brushfire Elemental gets +2/+2 until end of turn. This is also dope. I mean, this is more of the plated Geopede, right? It's this and the Griffin that we were talking about are the two plated Geopede evolutions, really.
Yeah, this is the plated Geopede for sure. Right. Akoum Hellhound is the step links. This is the plated Geopede. And the fact that you get access to green if you just play those 2 cards in the same colors is nice.
Yeah.
Because with step links, if you wanted access to green, you had to play a 3rd color, which wasn't feasible in Standard. So that's why Alex was saying it was Boros. The Adventuring Gear deck was Boros because you had fetches, but no duels you could fetch.
Right.
So you were just playing 4 Marsh Flats, 4 Arid Mesa, 4 Scalding Tarn. And then basics.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think this card is sweet. I think if there's a landfall aggressive creature deck in Standard, for sure, this is the card. I think even in Historic or other formats, this is a card that kind of works in that space.
It was in the landfall list.
It was. So even modern playable, maybe, if that deck is modern playable.
Fringe modern playable.
All right, we got, and now we're in the world of legendaries. Phylath World Sculptor, 4 red-green, legendary creature elemental. When Phylath World Sculptor enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each basic land you control. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put 4+1/+1 counters on target plant you control. You ask for your Avengers of Zendikar. Avengers of Zendikar is now a legendary creature. It's worse, but it's legendary. So from the fact that this can be your commander makes it different. It has 1 less. Yeah,
costs a mana less. I was going to say.
Yep, it costs 1 less, and it's not that much worse than Avengers of Zendikar. But it's much worse, but it does things well in a way
it makes
that
a
is
plant
not
for each basic you control, which is a rough one.
Yep. And it also it makes 1 big plant versus an army of medium-sized plants that slowly get bigger and bigger.
But I guess one thing that's interesting about this is like you play it, you make your plants. Next turn, you play a land. You now probably have a profitable attack with your plant.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Avenger, you're like, I have a bunch of 1/2s, pass.
Right. You can actually start doing stuff with this the turn you untap, or even the turn you play it if you can make plants before that.
I mean, this is all assuming like you're not doing shenanigans with your plants, right? Because that's what I was saying. The main use case for Avenger is like I sack my plants all to do something wild, or I have Cathar's Crusade in play and everything's huge, or
right. And this is a card like this is going to make a very cool commander deck, right? And what's cool is it makes the landfall commander deck different than Angry Omnath. That I think is cool. I think it'll do some fun stuff. I'm excited to play against this and play with it. We are eventually going to do a Masters of or MMCast commander stream, not next week, but probably the week after that. I think next week right now we're confirmed to have Ben Wheeler and Gavin Verhey on to join us and play some commander. But I think the week after that, once we're able to maybe get some cards or play with them a little bit more after release, we'll do like each of us picks a new commander and builds a commander on it, a commander deck around it. And I'm interested to see if anyone builds Phylath or one of the following ones.
It'll be Ben.
I think
that's definitely definitely Ben's style.
Yeah, big
Phylath
grindy
strikes me as a Ben card.
The only thing preventing me is that I already have like a red-green land deck, and do I want it to no longer be Borogamos who throws stuff at people?
Well, I assume like you could just turn it into Phylath for one stream.
Yes.
If you want, I mean, assuming that Phylath is your go-to.
Right. It does do a lot of things I like. I think if I was going to pick a land one, hold on 1 second. But first, Nissa Shadow of Bots, 2 black-green.
Nissa of Shadowed Boughs.
Was
never for the listeners
gonna know how to pronounce that word. There was no chance. That was never had 0.
It's one of those words that you see a lot in text, like in books and stuff, but you never hear it spoken because, like, what person doesn't just say branch?
So 2 black-green, legendary planeswalker Nissa comes in at 4 loyalty. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa of Shadow Branches. +1, untap target land you control. You may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature and with haste and menace until end of turn. It is still a land. You may put a then it's her ultimate is -5. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So kind of a cool. So there's a few things going on with this card. The first one is that it has landfall plus loyalty, which in older formats could be pretty crazy. You can get a lot of loyalty onto Nissa pretty quickly with fetch lands. The second thing is she does the normal Nissa thing. You get to untap a land. You don't have to make it a creature, which is cool. So you're no longer like risking your lands if you don't want to. Or you can just get in and attack with it. It doesn't block though, so it does no longer has the ability to last until your next turn. So she doesn't protect herself very well, other than the fact that she can kind of just get loyalty counters more quickly because she can +2 basically every turn. But then her -5, which she can do the turn she comes into play. So you can play her on turn 5, play a land, and then ultimate and put, if you have something that you want to put from your hand into play equal to how many lands you have, or reanimate it from your graveyard. I guess at that point you're really playing to reanimate, right?
I mean, it depends. Like, Through the Breach is a 5-mana card that is good. Well, obviously, like, this doesn't give haste, so it's not worth like building an entire combo deck around it. But I could see a standard deck.
It's converting mana cost equal to how many lands you have, right? So
it has to be 5 cost or less.
So on turn 5, you're not going to play this to then put a 5-drop from your hand into play, losing this card, because you could have just played the 5-drop. But if you have something to reanimate, like that is like, if I have her and I have like a Chupacabra in my graveyard and my opponent has something I have to kill that turn, I'm letting Nissa die to reanimate that removal spell out of my graveyard.
So you play her on turn 5, Fabled Passage, crack it, then you get to put in your Corvold or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And I think that's a real play with this card, right? This is the exact card that Fabled Passage is a great landfall card for, because you want to play Fabled Passage on turns 4, 5, 6, and 7, and Nissa wants you to play fetch lands on turns 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Fabled Passage is good with any landfall card that costs more than 2. For the most part. And even some that do cost 2, like I think it's great with Lotus Cobra, Kazandu Nectar Pod as well. But
right.
Just like the aggressive cards, I feel like it's awkward, because if you're just like jamming a bunch of, tap lands into your deck because of the new tap lands plus Fabled Passages, and you like look at your aggro deck opening hand and you have 3 lands and they all enter tapped, and you're like, ugh.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, no, I think this card's really cool. I like this space. I really like actually all the Planeswalkers, which we'll talk about the other ones later. I think we already talked about actually the other 2. I think we talked about Nahiri and Jace in a previous episode. I like Kicker, and I like Landfall being added to, like, I like them using keywords. I liked Food being on Oko. Oko had his own issues, but like putting the mechanic of the set on the cards that are being included is sweet. I liked that there was ability counters on I was going to call Vivian, and that Elsbeth had Escape. I think that's a really cool design space that they're figuring out. And then the last card with Landfall, and the last card for today's episode. Oh, and I'm so glad that you're here for this episode, Michael. Because this card is Omnath, Locus of Creation. Red, green, white, and blue. Legendary creature, elemental, 4/4. When Omnath, Locus of Creation enters the battlefield, draw a card. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life if this is the first time the ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add red, green, white, blue. And if it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So the reason I'm glad that you're on this episode is that So Omnath is 4 colors. It does 4 things. I think it's cool how this, like one of the challenge 4-color cards have that this, I think, is a cool different take on it that uses Landfall, is like often they end up just being kind of different versions of charms, right? Where it's like, here's each color doing a thing, and this is doing that, right? You have, it enters the battlefield, draws a card, that's the blue half. Then the first land you play, you gain life, that's the white half. The second land you play, you make 4 mana, that's the green half. And then if you play even an additional land beyond that, here's damage to every player and planeswalker, every whatever, that's the red half. And so it's this cool kind of play space in there. It does what I think is cool is I do think this is the best 4-color lands commander. Now Golos might just be better, right? Like I think it's between this and Golos going all the way to 5 colors. But like the fact that I can now play basically what is my Tamio deck or my Bergamos deck, or I can play, but I get like Knight of the Reliquary, and I get Weathered Wayfarer, and I get like all of those like random good white lands cards, land tax. I think is cool. And plays a little bit different than maybe Corvald, right? Like I think like there's a bunch of good 2-mana, two color legends. There's Corvald, which is probably the de facto best Jund. Well, it's for sure the best Jund one, but probably the de facto best 3-color lands commander. And then now does this give you like this lets you play blue and white in a lands deck, which I think is cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to dampen anything because I know that there are a lot of Omnath fans out there, but Omnath is not for me.
Sure. Fair.
I am not excited by Omnath, unfortunately.
I do think in more bringing it to Brawl, Historic, Standard levels of arena play, this card does a lot. Like it's almost kind of, it reminds me of Nicol Bolas a lot, the Planeswalker one, the Planeswalker creature one, where it like enters play and gains value. Nicol Bolas made them discard a card. This draws you a card, which is better. And then can like has Planeswalker like abilities where once a turn you get an effect, and then if you're able to do a little bit more, you get better and better effects as time goes on.
Yeah, the rate on this is good. Obviously, like it's a 4/4 for 4 that draws a card and it gains you 4 life
every turn.
Every turn, as long as you can play a land, which will probably be frequently because you're playing this in a deck, probably with a bunch of lands and possibly with some ramp.
And
so, like, yeah, that is good at a base level and demands an answer and always 2-for-1s them. And just like the rate is good. The rest, not exciting to me. It's just like a rate card in my mind.
Okay.
Like I get a 1-shot add mana, but I have to have played another land.
You have to fetch, right? If you fetch, you get to ramp 6. You get like super Lotus Cobra.
Yeah, that's cool, I guess. And then 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker I don't control for the 3rd land. That's the most difficult land because now you need to work for it, right?
Right, you have to play.
Second land is just a fetch land. 3rd land, how are you putting the 3rd land into play?
Yeah. I don't think that. I don't think you're playing it for the 3rd effect. I think you're playing it to play.
You're not, but that's disappointing. That feels like the grand finale to me, right?
Sure.
I thought when I first read it, it was 4 damage to each opponent and each permanent they control. And that was pretty cool to me. And I was like, ooh, you could like give it Death Touch or something, which is a little tougher because you're not playing black, and maybe we'll figure something out. And then it doesn't do that. And I was like, this is just a rate card. Doesn't do anything exciting to me.
You wouldn't be excited playing this in like constructed, not necessarily commander. Like this card.
Yeah, maybe in constructed. I saw a pretty cool. I don't know if you follow Yeoman5 on Twitter.
I do not.
He is a brewer for many formats, primarily standard and pioneer, and some historic.
Okay.
I believe he writes for TCG Player or something. I don't know. I don't read his articles, but I follow him on Twitter, and he every time a set comes out, he does 50 deck lists, and he had a pretty sweet Teamer Ultimatum deck, whatever that ultimatum is called. Genesis Ultimatum, I think, with Omnath, and just like, big ramp, bunch of big permanents, doofuses.
Right.
But like his point was that if the Genesis Ultimatum puts lands into play, because it just puts all permanent cards in the top 5 into play. So you can like get Omnath and a bunch of lands and just like go off and play another one because you like got mana and you're like, And I was like, that's pretty sweet.
That's sweet. I'm into that. Yeah, I think he's cool. I definitely like him in the constructed world, right? Like it's hard to play. It's a 4-color card, but it's not impossible. And I think he does sweet things. I don't know. I'm excited by this Omnath. I just like also the story of Omnath. I'm excited to see what 5-color Omnath does.
Yeah, it should have been 5 colors.
Why not? Why are you so mad about the middle
when he
ground?
gets black.
It's cool that they do stuff like this. I would much rather them do this and have dog cards and cat cards than us like live in the world where it's like, no, we are only doing serious things and we refuse to have Bruce Tarl ever be printed as a card or referenced on an Ox card again. Like I like all this
I don't understand
stuff.
The connection between 4-color Omnath and jokes.
Well, so because it's like it was a joke, right? And they're like, no, this is what players expect. It's the meme is that Omnath keeps adding colors.
I guess.
Yeah.
He
All
doesn't
right.
do it for me. The last Omnath was pretty cool, actually, in my opinion.
Okay.
I played it in Standard a lot.
Okay. So not every Omnath can't just be for Michael. This one's for the Alex Kesslers of the world.
Yeah.
So that's it for the episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, everywhere at the MMCast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Hit that like and subscribe button. Comment below. We'd love to hear what landfall cards you're most excited by. You can find me at Kess Wiley all over the internet, from Twitch to Twitter to Instagram to whatever. You can find Michael on Twitter at DUR He's going to spell it.
DUDARDD.
Yep. So definitely check that out there. I was on Gavin Verhey's morning show on Wednesday. So if you go check out Good Morning Magic, hosted by Gavin Verhey, we did a whole question game. I asked them a bunch of questions. I'd love to hear what your thoughts on the questions were. If you have some answers to that, definitely go comment there and subscribe to Gavin's show. Next Monday, he's going to be on our stream. So Gavin and Ben Wheeler from Loading Ready Run are going to be on the Monday night Commander stream on the MMCast YouTube channel and my Twitch channel at Kess Wiley, and all the other good things. And thank you so much also to our patrons, of course, and subscribers. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.